Hello and welcome to the Comedian's Paradise, a podcast where we speak to mavericks, magicians, comedians, all sorts of nuts and bolts across the comedy world. Now, today's guest has come all the way from the place of Kevin Hart. His name is Yoder, like Yoder. He's a man who's been in the Philadelphia comedy scene and he's going to tell you how Rocky became into existence. Please welcome Yoder.
I love it. That was a great intro. Thank you so much. I think Rocky is like the perfect character to describe Philly and even the comedy scene because we're a bunch of hustlers. We're a bunch of and I'll be honest, I think some of the greatest comedians I've seen it are coming out of Philly right now, and it's exciting to see just the buzz in our area with comedy.
I'm intrigued to find out a little bit more because I've heard, I think my last guest, no, my second last guest before you, Nya Yennefen says that a lot of, no, I'm not going to paraphrase it, but like struggle creates a lot of comedy. And like if you have good weather and this and that, comedy, it comes from a dark place. And I know that in the East Coast, it can be a bit rougher. But if you go to California, I don't know. I know when I went to Boston, that even though it was one day, the comedians there were really good and amazing. And New York was, it wasn't by far, but for the moment, it was the best scene that I went to when I was in America. Chicago was close up there, but LA, despite it being a comedy hub, I would say was actually behind both of those cities, from what I could see. That's
Yeah, I
my
think
opinion, though. The LA comics don't get offended, but that's my opinion from what I saw from the gigs I did.
So I'm on a tour right now, and I have there's a couple LA comics that I get to talk with, like Liz Blanc, who just got Fresh Faces last year in Montreal, and Sam Salem, and who's an up and coming comedians from LA. And I think the challenge in LA is stage time, because and the places are so spread out. Whereas if you go to like Philly, you go to Boston, you go to New York, whether it's public transit or just walking distance, you can get to places and you can get multiple spots in a night. Where, from what I hear, LA is harder to do that. So you really got to know someone and you really got to fight for stage time. And so a lot of those LA comics tend to travel or go on the road because it's the only way they can get time. So I think that's something that I think is the one, maybe the only things that might put LA a little bit behind, but the opportunity for, if you're looking to move on from comedy and do something else, then I think LA has got a huge advantage that, maybe some of the others don't have. Chicago, I agree. I have a friend of mine, Victoria Flynn, who had been living, I met her in New York City. She's from Chicago, moved back to Chicago, and now she's kind of weaving between both scenes. And she had talked a little bit about to me how Chicago's sometimes a little clicky, so sometimes it's hard to break barriers. But there are tons. Lincoln Lodge is like a great venue in Chicago where they have a lot of rooms. So there's a lot of opportunity to produce your own shows. And so, I think that's something in Chicago, but in Philly, I don't know if it's just because of the pandemic, but there's just so many hustlers that we all found a place to have comedy. We didn't have a ton of scenes. We have Punchline, we have Helium, and we have City Winery. And aside from those three, I would even classify City Winery as a comedy club, but they do offer shows. So, but there's so many people that were just willing to find a bar, find a restaurant, find space, and I think that the grit of Philly, I think, is what makes the scene so special.
Mm. And like with Philadelphia itself, like what made you get into comedy? And what do you think? You mentioned it's gritty and amazing, but what is it about what made you get into comedy? And how would you describe what the scene as a whole, other than being gritty?
Yeah, so for me personally, I always used humor in my life. I moved a lot as a kid. I went to like seven different schools from the time I was in kindergarten till graduation. And so I think I've always used humor to fit in. But I didn't consider comedy and writing on purpose until the pandemic, to be honest. I found myself not laughing as much. And my wife and I, we have two small kids, and her and I loved comedy. That was our first date, was going to a comedy show. Our last date before the pandemic was at a comedy show in our area. And so I think for us, I just realized we weren't laughing. Everything had changed, and I wanted to be the change. I wanted to do something different. And I watched a special by Mike Birbiglia. It was my boyfriend, my girlfriend's boyfriend. And I just loved the story he was telling about who became his wife. And I was like, you know what? I want to do this so that my wife and we can make our own comedy. We don't have to rely on this. And we were going to an open mic that was outdoors at a club called Soul Joel's. It was the only club in the area. Comics were coming from all over because he had found a way to do it outside, socially distant. And I just said, I want to try. And then I just got bit. I went up for the first time and I had to go up again and again and again. And thankfully the scene in Philly was getting back to like being indoors and things like that, that there were just so many opportunities to do a mic, that I was able to keep going, meet more people, meet people within the scene. Everybody was so welcoming between, I feel like Philly, Delaware, and South Jersey are kind of like together. You see a lot of crossover in those communities kind of coming together. So that's what's kind of special about it, is it's not Philly proper. There's just this big bubble now that's kind of grown from there, and there's a lot of crossover, which is great. So I think, you know, having been new to the scene, I was so grateful how welcoming and how much opportunity there was. If you proved you were funny.
Hmm. And from seeing the Philadelphia scene itself, what have you noticed in terms of comedians that, well, aren't getting where they would like to be, and ones that are really going places?
Yeah, it's really fascinating because it's almost like we all bought a lottery ticket, but they're only calling so many numbers a day. So it's like it feels like any given person I see, you're like, oh wow, nobody knows this person, but every time they kill. And I didn't realize this. Did you know where the term stand up? I just learned this myself recently, why they call it stand up comedian.
No, why do they call it?
So I was reading a book. I think it might have been Jesse David Fox's book on the comedy book, and it was because back in the day, mobsters used to manage boxers, and they would call a boxer a stand-up boxer because he was reliable. And so then they started having comedians come to entertain them and their wives at dinner, and they would call them a stand-up comic because they could rely that they were always going to be funny and always get them to laugh. And so I think there's so many actual stand-up comedians within the Philly scene that like at any given moment, if you're in the right place at the right time and the right person sees you, who knows? I mean, there's some amazing talents. Like there's a buddy of mine, Jim Gillespie, who he and I started around the same time, but now he's like opening for Casey Rocket all over the country. Who Casey Rocket's blown up from Kill Tony. I don't know if you're familiar with him at all, but he's really caught fire. And they're just this zany, you don't know what's going to come next. I just love the diversity. So Jim Gillespie's huge. Rob Stant is another comedian they were both semifinalists in Philly's Funniest, which is a contest that Helium holds every year. People like Shane Gillis have won it in the past. And so I think there's just such an open market for diverse people. We have this comedian called The Wid, and he's been around forever, and he's a prop comic. Think like Carrot Top. But this guy is so intelligent and so smart, and he comes with like a truckload of random things, and he can just turn them into jokes. So it's so interesting to see the diversity. I mean, funny's funny. So whether you're doing stuff like Casey Rocket and being zany, whether you're more calculated and anecdotal like I am, or whether you're like a prop comic like him, or even I've seen ventriloquist comics as well. So it's like it's so interesting to see the diversity. And I think there's just such talent that I think we're going to be seeing a lot. There's another comic, Naeem Ali, is one who's blowing up. Shane Gillis has sort of been really big in the scene, helping other people kind of get opportunities and come open for him. Or there was a big comedy festival in Las Vegas last week called Skankfest. And so I just saw a lot of people posting from the Philly scene who were out there and who are doing some big things. There's this podcast called Do Rag and the Deer Tag. They actually had this guy, Dr. Drew, who's like this famous sex therapist who had a show on MTV years ago, and he was on the podcast with them. I'm like, it's just amazing to see. Once opportunity happens, I think anybody in the scene is primed and ready to show what they got.
Hmm. And what are you able to gig sort of like 7 times a week in Philadelphia?
100%. Yeah, absolutely. I will say Saturdays can be tricky, but so we have a Facebook group called the Philly Comedy Network, and it's a private group, but you can join and the admins will vet you and let you in. But there's a spreadsheet of everything that's by day of the week with all the info, which is great. I mean, now I will say like Sundays can be harder. Like Sunday, there's always one in Center City at Fergie's Pub, which is like a new material mic. And then but so it's like lighter on Sunday and Saturday. Actually, tonight's Friday. I had a gig and then it got canceled. So now I'm like, oh no, it's Friday. I need stage time. I actually am going to travel a little bit towards central Pennsylvania today, and there's a gig at this like bar that's really like an open mic, but there's nothing in the town. So like the bar will be packed with people, and it'll be a great. I actually grew so much as a young comic going there. So I'm going to drive up there tonight and do some time. So yeah, that you can get time any day. You could hit on like a Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Monday. You could hit 3, 4 mics in a night. They've done a really good job of people in the scene saying, "Oh, okay, I'll have my mic here, so you can go here. If you go early on the list, you can get here." And so everybody's kind of working together to make sure we get stage time. And I think that's the key because it's nobody's getting paid for this. You know what I mean? These are just people that know how this works, and we want to see Philly thrive. So we're just playing together to create the opportunity. So even though this stand up seems like an individual sport, we're playing it like a team here.
Oh, okay, that's interesting to hear because I often hear so much about comedy being very divided and all this division.
Yeah, and I will say, and I don't know if it's just I've always been kind of like a weaver because I went just like a chameleon of sorts, but like I've been welcomed in every circle, whether it's and sometimes you have more urban rooms. Like there's a mic on Monday called the Comedy John, which I would say would be predominantly black people, but not all. And they're very welcoming, and I love going there. I've had a lot of opportunities early on doing shows where I would might have been the only white comic in the room or the only white person in the room. And like that interchange now where we've come as a country with that is beautiful because I mean I don't know I don't want to say this is racist, but there's nothing like a black woman's laugh. Like I mean when you get a
Whoa!
there is like nothing better because it's just so freeing. And there's something about the way uh comedy's enjoyed because people want real sometimes. We don't want goofy, we don't want contrived. What I found in a lot of urban rooms is they want real. And I feel like a lot of my comedy is real. It's my story. And I think that's powerful. That resonates with anybody, regardless of race. But yeah, there's just a lot of opportunity um throughout for anybody to get up there and do what they do. And that's special because that's a safe space. It's amazing to think that comedy can be a safe space to say all sorts of stuff and protect that kind of freedom of speech.
Hmm. What's what are like the unsung heroes of like the open mic, the mid-level comedy rooms, and like what's the big Numa Una comedy club where the best comedy talent in Philadelphia go?
Yeah, so I feel like Helium's like the premiere, and having between Punchline and Helium, I think both are great. Don't get me wrong, but there's something about Helium where they're trying to really grow the scene. Like they've started putting out reels on their social media that are made by the comics that are there. So I feel like they've you could go in there any day of the week and you're going to see a bunch of comics in the back of the room. Um, and that's not the case with Punchline. I actually one time I've seen Punchline not let you in the room because you didn't have a ticket. And I was like, that's not right I mean, you don't even have a full room. Why wouldn't you want more people in the back if they're comics? But Helium is super welcoming like that. So I would classify Helium as sort of the top of the chain in Philly, but there's a lot of ancillary ones on the side. Like there's this independent club run by Tyler Wolf and Manny Brown called Next in Line Comedy, and they started just finding venues that had space, and they're getting names like Emma Willman came in from New York City and taped one of her specials with them. Carrie Fian has been there, so they've been getting some very up and coming New York City talent to come in. as well, and kind of mix into the Philly scene and get a buzz. So that's kind of exciting to see too. So I think there's been a lot of crossover between Philly and New York now. There's been some comics from Philly that have gone to New York, but then they still stay in relation. So you'll see, a buddy of mine just had a show at Punchline called Friends from New York. And he had brought a couple of friends from New York, and they had done a show at Punchline last week. So you see a lot of crossover, which I think is cool. It's kind of like I used to watch Scooby Doo back in the day, and it was fun whenever they had the Harlem Globetrotters come on, or Batman and Robin joined them, and you're like, oh, this is the greatest episode ever because now two of my favorite characters are together. So I love seeing that kind of crossover because then I'll see someone at the stand who's from Philly, like Naeem Ali's been going up to the stand a bunch in New York, which is one of the top clubs in New York. So it's cool to kind of see the crossover. But yeah, to answer your question, I would say Helium's at the top of the chain. Next in line and Punchline are probably the next two.
Okay. And what? So being in Philadelphia, I know that there's the Philadelphia cheese. Was it the cheesesteak?
Cheesesteak, yeah. Absolutely. So there's a lot of debate. Actually, in the suburbs by me, there's a couple guys that are from South Philly, which is sort of where it originated, but they've brought it outside the city, and it's a place called Gazzo's. And it's actually Gazzo is the name of one of the characters from Rocky. So the whole thing is like Rocky themed. But their cheesesteak is absolutely out of this world. But, depending on who you ask, people will tell you all sorts of stuff, but it's not going to be Pat's and Geno's. That's like the Burger King and McDonald's of cheesesteaks. You're not going to hear people say, and I know Gino personally, and they're all friends. But for me personally, I like there's a place called Delisandro's, which is a little bit in the outskirts of Philly. Jim's, there's and then I like Gazzo's. Those would be probably be my top three Philly cheese.
Okay.
But it's a big debate. I mean, it is there are constantly debates and votes. And, people get very excited about their cheesesteak and which place has the best roll and all of that. And listen, we actually had a cheesesteak festival a couple years right before the pandemic at the Philadelphia Stadium, and everybody brought their version. Yeah, it's a lot of fun. It's cool whenever you have a culture like that where it's something like silly, but it brings people together and it promotes small business, and that's great to see.
And what would you say is the culture of Philadelphia? I know it's quite gritty, but what is it that makes it such a unique city with diverse characters, and how does it shape the comedy of the people there?
Yeah, I mean, I think we all are trying to find a way to talk about how we experience the world, the things that are happening, whether it's like, the politics of today or whether it's just the even sometimes poking fun at taboo topics. Like in Philly, we've had shootings, not super recently, but within the past, it had been, so I think whenever comedy is so important to diffuse situations like that, and I think you have a lot of comics in Philly that are willing to, I'll say the phrase, go hard in the paint, just like they're willing to go to a level and kind of see where the line is. And I think like I said earlier, it's a special that we have that safe space to find the line and maybe jump over it because you don't know where it is until you cross it sometimes. And I think there's a lot of space in Philly to do that. Whereas from what I've heard in like LA or Chicago, like you can say a certain word that might turn a whole crowd against you. I don't see a lot of that in Philly, unless it's, I don't know. I did see somebody once struggle in a crowd when they talked about like police brutality or something like that. But for the most part, you're kind of free to talk about whatever. I think that's what I've seen in Philly that maybe some places like LA and Chicago don't have is a space to maybe say some of those things or test the waters. And I love the fact that some people are unapologetic about finding the line and finding the funny. I think people like Dave Chappelle, you look at like they're willing to push the line to see, hey, what's funny? Shane Gillis, who's like, I mean, the guy from Philly right now, we're all so excited to see how much success he's had now after having been from Philly. He won Philly's Funniest. He had been at Helium. Now he's shooting his second season of Tires for Netflix. right down the road in Westchester. So I think everybody's excited to feel that energy now because there's this buzz around because he's here with people like Andrew Schultz and Brian Six. There's just so many Mike Graney. There's so many strong comics that he's been bringing on that show that are now in the area. I think everybody's just excited to see who's going to pop in, kind of like a New York vibe, like or like a Comedy Store vibe in LA. Oh, who's going to pop in today? So I think there's a lot of that kind of buzz in the city now because we know Shane's back and he's got a lot of like comedians that are up and coming with him, and so it's kind of bringing everybody a lot of energy. And I think that's what I like about Philly is there's this buzz and we feel like a family, even though we may not see each other all the time. But when we do, we come together for Sunday dinner. So like there's a really cool thing around the holidays where a lot of the older comics, there's a place where we all gather and like it's like I think right before Thanksgiving, which is the end of November, they all get there's a room where you'll get all these comics from all different generations together. So I feel like there is this kind of family vibe to it, maybe a little bit more than you might see from other scenes. Even if sometimes it's your younger brother who you want to give noogies to, and you hate that he went and stole something out of your closet, but there's this vibe that it's a family. Sometimes we're a happy family, sometimes we're not, but we're a family.
What's and following on from that, so I've got four interesting questions, and really interested to see what your sponsors are. Um, what what is something recently that's happened with family life that's taught you about comedy? What's the most painful thing you've had recently happen that's taught you a lot about comedy? And what is the maddest and funniest thing that you witnessed that's taught you a lot about comedy?
So just for me personally in my own life, I mean that's sort of what guides a lot of my comedy. So like in terms of stuff like I have a daughter, my oldest has autism. She's on the spectrum. She's 10 turning 11 soon. And I had a hard time. I didn't really understand what that meant about 10 years ago. And so for me that was a lot of pain. That was a lot of like I don't understand what happened, why. And for me, that's turned into some of my favorite material to talk about on stage now. Now that I've processed that information, I can find the funny in it. And I've had a lot of success recently with I had a clip, it's almost in a hit about to hit 4 million on Instagram where I talked about a time when her teacher sent a note home that she was using the F word in first grade. Oh, sorry, that's my dog, but she was using it appropriately. I love finding the funny in some of those scenes that maybe wouldn't have been. Sorry, hold on. So I think that pain for me of what would my daughter be like, and now I get to kind of celebrate that, and so I love that. I think the other thing that's sort of interesting is my upbringing. I was raised by two women, so I have my moms are gay, but it was in a time in 80 Scranton, which was like a coal mining town, like salt of the earth kind of. You weren't gay, you weren't allowed to be anyways. And so that was a time that was well before the movement. That was actually probably one of the worst times because everybody was talking about AIDS, everybody was talking about this and that, and so it was not a time where you were safe to be out. And so my family, I joked that I lived in witness protection because we had to sort of like finesse what was happening in my house. And oh, it was my aunt or it was my mom's friend, or, we were creating a scene of what it was. And so I like to joke about that now and kind of break the tension of how I had to grow up pretending that I didn't have two moms. And then my dad is also gay. So like my parents had like played house and had me, and then they were both like, we're both gay. Uh, like my mom went right away and recognized it. My dad tried to marry another woman and find Jesus, and that didn't work. So now he's married to a guy in Spain for the last 20 years. My mom ended up marrying an Australian woman, and I grew up with them. My mom's one was from Australia and one was from Scranton. So I got a very cultured upbringing, just in the people that they hung out with. My other mother from Australia just had seen so much stuff. She had been a military wife for a while before she met my mom. And so I just learned so much from her. about the world. And we would go on vacation. The only place we could ever go on vacation was a place called P-Town. It was in Massachusetts, and it was like the only place where it was like gay Disney World. It was the only place that they felt like they could hold hands in public, or we could go out to dinner and we didn't have to lie. So like I love kind of making fun of that era of time, and how could we, why was it like that, and so that's some pain from my childhood, because I think all comics, we're broken people, like they're, and now we have this need to talk about that. So I like to process a lot of that, because I know there's people out there. I've had people come up to me, whether it's with autism stuff, or whether they're like, oh, my daughter's gay and I never saw a future for her. I didn't know I could be a grandma, or I didn't, I've had so many people come up to me because I presented topics in a way and broke that tension that allowed them to kind of see, oh, well, here's a seemingly normal guy who was raised by gay people. I'm not normal, but a seemingly normal. Um, but so like those are moments from my childhood that, and moments of things I'm dealing with as a parent that I love to kind of use as fuel to find the funny, because that's, I think we're all, after the pandemic, we're all just trying to process the world, and we all know that what we care about now, because we all saw what it was like when we were locked in our rooms and we didn't know what was going to happen next. And I think we're all done with the bullshit. We're all ready to just live a life that, if it doesn't have F yes, fuck yeah energy, then I don't want to be a part of it, and I think we're all at a level as humans saying, well, what are we here for? Let's make the most of what's going on. And if there's some stuff that's not so good, then let's find a way to make it funny.
Bloody hell, I did not expect that.
Yep. So well, that's the thing too, is like, you don't know things about people, and I think that's what's great about comedy, is like, if people can kind of reveal themselves in a certain way, then that's super intriguing, and that's what a lot of my comedy is about, is sort of, revealing some of those things. Because I always thought that about people when if they found out my mom was gay, like, what, her pancakes weren't going to taste good anymore. Like, what do like, what was going to happen? I was so worried when I would have sleepovers that, God love them, they would stay in separate rooms. We had a guest room. So we would pretend one of the guest rooms was one of their bedrooms. And, we had such a charade we had to put on, for so many years that, uh, now I look back on it, I'm like, that was so silly. Like, what, nobody, like, because now nobody cares. I'm like, my daughter came home. My other daughter's in second grade. She's like, oh yeah, Kyle has two dads. I'm like, you can't, like, I grew up in an era where you couldn't say that. Like, and then now she's just coming home. Yeah, Kyle has two dads. So I'm excited because now my daughters, like, my other mother passed away before COVID, but like my dad and his husband, they called them Pop Pop and Poppy. They have a name. I just was so excited that they had a name, because I didn't have a name for Colleen. She was my mom's friend or my aunt or whatever, but that wasn't a term. It's like Kamala Harris's husband. Like, we've never had a man that's been like in the second gentleman. I'm like, that's such a weird term to say. Like, so it's just so funny, how we identify and label things in the world. And so I like to play with, some of those topics in my comedy.
No, bloody hell, that's whoa, that's bloody very. I mean, what was what was the biggest struggle growing up in school? That must have, when you're different in school, my God, and then maybe even when you're an adolescent, like going to uni or like stuff. No, not uni, maybe not as much, but before then,
That's
my
well,
God.
that's when I felt like I was freer to say it. That's when I could call them my parents for the first time. But I just had to be vague. I just learned to lie. I feel like that's what it is. It just taught me how to lie. Because we'll be at the grocery store and you run into people and you're like, oh, who's this? Oh, it's my mom's friend. And I learned how to just so casually lie. That I don't like that, because it's like I can manipulate scenarios so easily, and I don't like that about myself. It's like I was a tactic I needed to survive that period of my life, but now it's like, okay, it's like Superman. He's like, okay, yeah, you could have X-ray vision, but you can't really use it when you're walking by the girls' locker room, So it's like, how do I train myself not to use these powers that I've built up, so that I'm not like, doing that. I was working on a new bit where I lied about being an Eagle Scout on my college application. If you guys had you have yeah Boy Scouts and all of that in the UK? You know that
Yeah, yeah,
concept?
yeah. They
Oh,
say what's it called? Dirty, like yeah. There's a long running joke about these scout camps being with perverts.
oh yeah, but like so like I did Cub Scouts and then you go to Boy Scouts and then if you make it to the top of Boy Scouts you get an Eagle Scout and usually it involves doing some big community project and all of these hours and I didn't do anything. I barely made it out of Cub Scouts, but I got a letter from the president congratulating me on being an Eagle Scout, so I used that as stolen valor. And I was like, oh, I was like, how did that mistake happen? How could the president have sent me a letter? What must have been happening in 1998 that President Clinton accidentally signed something in the office that he didn't intend? And I'm like, oh, that's right, Monica Lewinsky. She must have been there that day, and he was getting something under the desk, and he just was signing everything that day. But using that as like my like I was lying about anything. So it's just the that part of it for me is the hardest was that now I learned so easily to lie to people that um I don't like that feeling of being dishonest. I want everything on the table now. I want to talk about everything now. I want to talk about my moms. I want to talk about my dad and his husband. I want to talk about my autistic daughter. I want to talk about the random feelings or thoughts I'm having in my head as I'm trying to parent and what the hell does it mean to be a dad. So like I love that concept of taking all of that now and saying, oh, I can't be the only one. I mean, I know I'm the only one who's got the life that I just described, but even within that, there's a lot of relatable stuff for people, even if they didn't have two moms, even if they don't have an autistic daughter, like, there's a lot of relatability in there, which is a lot of fun. And I also talk a lot about being a teacher. I mean, I'm a public school teacher. I've been teaching for 20 years. I'm a Spanish and Latin teacher. And so that's another one. You wouldn't expect someone who looks like me to be a Spanish and Latin teacher. So there's a lot of fun to be had in that. I actually toured the country with a group called Board Teachers. I'm not going to be going, but we're coming to the United Kingdom for some shows this spring, um, in Manchester and Glasgow or somewhere else. But yeah, so it's like I get to explore that part of it too. I get to go to schools and talk to teachers about burnout and how comedy helped me uh save from being burnt out as a teacher, because being a teacher today, I mean, you talk to I don't know how it is in the UK, but around here, you talk to teachers now, we're all burnt out. We're all just so like we're just done. So we need that relief, we need that laughter. And so it's been fun to travel around the country and provide that for other teachers.
What is it about? What is the hardest thing about being a teacher that no one realizes? And what's the funniest thing about t being a teacher that no one realizes?
You can't just teach. It's not like you get in there, the bell rings, and I'm like having this Dead Poet Society moment where I am just imparting knowledge on 28 kids in front of me. Instead, did you put your cell phone in the cubby? I see 27 cell phones, but there's 29 of you here. Who are the two that didn't put their cell phones away? Now I've lost 5 minutes in figuring out whose cell phones aren't there. Then you start to teach, but now instead of having a family conversation, they're all having side conversations. So you go to put out this fire, and then this fire starts blazing, and then this fire starts blazing. Then you're like, okay, I've been here 15 minutes. Have I taught anything yet? No. Then all of a sudden, oh, can I go to the bathroom? Oh, can I go to this? Can I use my phone to call my boss to let him know I'm going to be late for work? Like, what are you talking? Like, there is no teaching that's happening. All it is these kids who don't know how to be in a room with 28 other people, and they all think that they can just do whatever they want because for a couple years they grew up in an area where they just did whatever they want. They were on Zoom, they muted, they shut their camera off, they were playing video games during class. Like, they don't know how to act in a classroom and be one of 28 people. And so if I get 10 minutes of teaching in a 45-minute period, like I'm emotionally and mentally exhausted because like you're processing 1,000 requests an hour. Can I do this? Don't do this. Sit down. Why are you over there? No, you can't go to the bathroom. And it's just like, I just
Hmm.
want to teach. And it's just like, I just want to teach. And it's exhausting. And you haven't even done it. You don't even feel like you've done anything. And so that's the part that I think people don't get is just how hard it is just to teach, just to get them to do an activity, It's just their ADHD. Everything's like a pop-up ad. Their brains are like have the attention span of a pop-up ad, and they can't tune in. So you just got to constantly repeat yourself a million times. So that part of it's laboring, it's just very laboring because it's like imagine that. Imagine doing a show and the audience just isn't feeling it, but you got to do your 30, 45 minutes and you got to get through it and the flop sweats happening and you're like, oh, they're not even paying attention. They're ordering drinks. That's what it's like. And it's just like, oh, I have to do 5 shows of these in a row. And it's like, what's the payoff? Oh, hopefully I won't get shot today. Oh, that'd be great. So it's just like it's just like what are we doing? So it's just that's the part of it. And then, the funny part is the fact that it is kind of comical the way the kids are. Like I have a couple kids that know I do comedy now, and they've seen some clips and reels and yo, tell me a joke. And I'm like, I then have to tell them, I'm like, dude, you are the joke. Like you are gonna be the joke. Like you're gonna do something stupid. I'm gonna go write it down, and then I'm gonna go tell a bunch of people tonight about it. So hearing their side conversations, hearing what they don't think I can hear is hysterical. Like you'll just hear the most random stuff. So I think that's fun because it's like watching a reality TV show. It's like watching Jersey Shore. You get a little privy information about and then how they talk to each other, the word choices they make, the slang. I mean, I do about 5-10 minutes just on the slang I'm hearing. Uh, so it's like, I think that's the fun part. And then just, like you said, taking the stuff that's so crappy and so shitty about it and making jokes about it. Like, how am I supposed to be patient with 150 kids and then I'm supposed to just come home and love my own children? Like, how do I have the emotional currency to come home and be a dad after I've had to be a dad to 150 kids I don't even love? So it's like I need like a rage room. There needs to be like a teacher rage room. I don't know if you guys have these in the UK, but we have these rage rooms where you can go and just like break stuff. And it's like all the rage to like do that. I'm like, we need a teacher rage room where I can just go and flip desks before I come home. There's a room that looks like my principal's office, go take a crap on his desk, and then I can come home and be a good dad. Because we need an outlet. We need something to kind of take that stress away. Because it is, I'll tell you, every 45-minute period, I get 4 minutes to recoup, and then I got a fresh group of kids coming in. And that's just laboring, it's like trying to, like I said, trying to do 3 headliner set in a row with a 4 minute break in between. So that's the part I think people might not realize is just the minutia of the day.
Mm. And what's okay? That's very oh. Um, and what's that's very interesting. Bloody hell, yeah. Yeah. Teachers are very underappreciated. That's definitely a truth.
Yeah, it's bad. It's like at the point now where it's just, yeah, it's disheartening. And you talk to teachers and we're all just trying to find a way to do something else or get out. Like there's such a teacher shortage. And I get it. I understand why, because it's just hard to say you're doing it for the love of the game because the game's changed. The game's not fun. Like, the game is parenting kids who aren't being parented at home, but I can't affect change in 45 minutes. I mean, they're in school for 6-7 hours, yeah, but then they're out of school for, the whole day after that. And what happens there pretty much dictates how they act. And they are probably a free for all. They're probably on their phones, they're probably doing whatever they want. I mean, the, it's different. I mean, I know when I was growing up, my parents weren't, they were both working, but like I wasn't on YouTube watching God knows what, I was in the neighborhood, like doing stuff, getting in trouble too, but my trouble wasn't like doing stuff where I'm getting like, did you hear about that concept where people swatted people, where they were like sending like SWAT teams to certain people's houses because they beat them on an online video game? So they found out where they lived and they said that they were like holding people hostage in their house just to get the police to like show up to their house. Like there's this big epidemic of if you were in online gaming and a kid beat you and you had this animosity to him, you would find out where he lived and you'd call the cops saying that there was a threatening situation going on in that house when there wasn't. And so like like that, those kind of things. We didn't get in trouble like that. I mean, maybe we stole some beer from our grandfather and drank it in the alley or like something silly, but like we weren't doing the level of things that kids today have access to do because of technology. That's scary. It's like this phone can be a loaded weapon now. It's like, and we're not teaching these kids how to use that weapon. There's no safety course how to use that weapon. We're just giving it to them and saying, get out of my hair, leave me alone.
Mm.
You know, I think we're seeing the after effects of that. It's going to take a generation to figure it out. I think once this generation grows up and realizes that, then it'll reset itself. And
Yeah,
then
because
maybe it'll change. And then maybe, we'll get better teachers back in the classroom who once we reset. But I think it's going to take this whole generation to come through and realize that we need to make a change.
there's a lot of toxic social media influencers that are benefiting from all of this.
Well, that's the other thing. Like, that's the other thing. It's like, because there's challenges and all these things they're doing, even within the teaching world. I'll see teachers making TikToks or doing videos about horror stories in the classroom. And I was like, I don't know that that's doing anything for anybody. Like, I'll see these social media influencers that have 100, 200,000, a million followers, and they're highlighting all the horror stories. But I don't know what that serves. I don't know what that does, like, other than get them a bunch of views because we all want to read the Inquirer. We all want to hear the tea. But like when you're just saying this one odd situation and making it sound like the rule, I don't think they're helping either. So I think some of these younger teacher influencers who have barely been in the classroom for 4 or 5 years and they're out here making videos like they know their ass from the hole in the ground is like insulting to those of us who have been doing it for 20 years because they are being toxic. But like to your point, there's a lot of kids challenging each other to do stupid stuff out there. And then all of a sudden, we got to lock down the bathrooms because they're trying to record themselves in the bathrooms breaking stuff because it's a challenge right now to see if you could get away with it. Like that whole concept of like doing stuff and trying to get notoriety and try to get likes because it's this dopamine rush. I mean, that's the challenge that we face because how do you compete with that? How do I as a teacher compete with the fact that in the palm of their hand can be anything else they'd rather be doing right now? You know,
Mm.
you want to use technology in the classroom, you do. But if they have a Chromebook open, they have a tab open, that's something else. They're playing video games. They're not paying attention to me. It's like texting and driving. And then all of a sudden the quiz comes and it's like they hit a tree because they weren't paying attention. They're like, wait, we have a quiz today? What's happening? We didn't learn that. I'm like, well, we learned that. You were busy doing something else on your tab. And now I got to talk to their parents. Now I got to spend time out of my day to talk to their parents because they didn't do what they were supposed to. That's the shit that gets me wild. I'll put all this time and prep in for the lesson. I'll teach the lesson, and because Jimmy doesn't pay attention, I now have to talk to Jimmy's parents and waste more of my time. And what's Jimmy doing? Fucking nothing. Like what? So I think once this generation gets through and hopefully by the time my daughters are parents, we'll have seen a kind of resurgence of some kind of normalcy, God
Yeah,
willing.
kids need to go out.
Well, yeah, they need to see how bad it can get. Like there was a thing, these middle schoolers at a school district not far from me, they all created fake accounts for their teachers on TikTok and then posted like homophobic and slanderous stuff as if they were that teacher. And so now all these teachers were having all this distress because their name was being tarnished because it looked like they were saying homophobic things. It looked like they were saying racist things, but it was just these kids who created the account, stole their image from the school website, and then made it look like it was them. And then they were having I mean, it was diabolical. They were having conversations in other people's comments. Like they catfished the heck out of this. It really, like they spent time. I'm like, how do you can't do the evens on page 145 for homework, but you can do this? Like, that's insane to me. And then they barely got a slap on the wrist. Like there still wasn't much done to them because it was too hard to figure out who did it. And it's just like that to me. That's the part that's scariest to me is like a kid can just start making stuff up about you. And now all of a sudden, it doesn't matter if it's true or not. It's out in the air. It's like we teach these kids when they're young. You take a tube of tape. tube of toothpaste. You squeeze it out on a plate, and then you tell them to put it back in the tube. And then they're like, "Well, how can I can't do that?" I'm like, "Exactly. You got to be careful what you say because there's no take back sometimes." And I think some of these kids are going to have to learn the hard way that there's no take back. Like there was a school shooting in Georgia. The actual parent got charged because he had provided the weapon to him as a gift, earlier. And so now that he got caught for 8 counts of like involuntary manslaughter or something and is going to go to
Whoa.
do time in jail because he was the one. And I think that's the next thing that has to happen. I think parents, I mean, at some point, like if you know that you gifted it and it wasn't like he stole it, at some point we got to find a way to stop the madness of school shootings. Like it's a thing that should not be. My kids should not have to do a drill where they might have to run, hide, or fight. Like that's not. I mean, I'm a big guy. I can't do any three of those things. Maybe fight, but run and hide, that's gonna be hard for me. So like we got to figure out something else. To do. So it's a scary it's a scary thing. Education in the United States, for as great of a country as we are, we have some challenges and some shortcomings that, we need to address.
Okay. Now, what, following from everything you've just said just there, if a kid was to start up, do stand-up comedy, get involved in Philadelphia, what advice would you give them?
I mean, I would love that. I think so. There's a comedian, a friend of mine who's also a teacher, and he teaches comedy at a school in Chester, which is a more urban environment, underprivileged kids, and he teaches comedy there. And I think that's so powerful for them because that's a creative outlet. That's how we want them spending their time. I don't want them time making TikToks for other, you know, let's spend some time making comedy, and so I would highly encourage that. I've had a lot of former students come out to my shows and then start doing them. I went to Mike a couple weeks ago and I ran into a former student of mine and she's now trying stand-up comedy. And I'm like, oh, that's amazing. So I think it's a great outlet because I think we're all have feelings that we're all processing. And I think it would be really cool for them to learn a positive way to channel that energy, maybe entertain their kids, their parents, their family. I work pretty clean, so like I would love to encourage them to do that too. But at the same time, I also like comedy that's not clean. So it's like but I would encourage them to find their voice, and that would be a great outlet. I would totally support that.
Hmm. What, but any advice for like youngsters getting into comedy now?
I mean, I think that the best thing they could do is, watch their favorite comedian. I like to watch my favorite comedian. I like to pause after the laughs happen and ask myself, why did people laugh? Like, what was funny about that? And then start to find their own voice. What are the things that they want to talk about, and find things they think are funny about it. And then when they're talking with their friends and they're talking with their family, try out some of their takes in conversation. That's how I started. I would just think something was funny, and at the lunchroom or in the copy room, I'd just start. If somebody talked about that topic, I'd find a way to say my punchline and see if people reacted. I think there's so many ways you can kind of test that, and then there's a lot of places that offer classes. I help with a class at a local comedy club called Soul Joel's right in my name in my area, and we would let somebody who was like 16 plus wanted to come do the class. I think that would be great. I work for a comedy school up in New York City. We used to have a teen workshop, but we haven't had as much interest to run it. So I would love that. I think I watched did you guys that Nickelodeon, there was like that dark side of kids television that was all about Nickelodeon. Well, in one of it, they talked about how in Chicago, the Laugh Factory used to do kids things. So I think that that's a huge outlet. I would love to see comedy clubs get back to having workshops for kids because I think it gives such confidence to get on stage and to do that. So I think there's just so many skills that they could learn that they could take with them on job interviews, on just interpersonal skills that would be so beneficial. It's if you're not a sports kid, you're not a drama kid, maybe you're a comedy kid. And so I would encourage parents to say, hey, if their kid's struggling to find it and they got a little bit of a funny bone, then try to find a comedy class for them or someone who's willing to take them under their wing because it can be powerful. I know it's been powerful for me as an adult.
Okay. And for anyone that's listening right now, how do they find out about you?
That's great. So I have a website, which is just jyodercomedy.com, either J or JAY. Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, J Yoder Comedy, JAYYODER, and then comedy. Yeah, please, I would love it. I'm pretty much all over the tri-state area of like Pennsylvania, New York, New Jersey, but I'll be traveling with the board teachers. So if you're in the United Kingdom, go to boardteachers.com. We got some shows coming up in the spring that I think you'll really enjoy. So especially if you're even if you're not a teacher, if you've had a teacher, it's a real fun night out to kind of get to hear all the antics that we deal with in education.
Okay. So guys, I hope you've enjoyed the episode. You know where to find Jay, and I will see you at the next episode. Uh, so take care, and I'll see you soon.
Thanks for having me.